So yeah, thanks very much for inviting me along again to James and Daniel, and also Steve and the team. It's great to be here again. So today I'm going to be talking about how to guarantee a successful acquisition. And much like we were just talking about, it doesn't matter whereabouts you are in the journey of your business, whether you've started selling products, you haven't started anything, or you've been in business for years. It's always one of those things you want to have in the back of your mind. So just a little bit of background on who I am, why you should listen to me, or not listen to me, as the case may be. So I launched FE International in 2010. We're the largest broker of online businesses in the sub $5 million range. We have a head office in Boston and also a small office in London, where I'm based. We've completed nearly $50 million in business sales, and we had a 95% closing rate in 2015. So pretty much every business we list will sell. And part of that is due to some of the things I'm going to talk about now. So firstly, just before we get into it, most people, the first thing they're even interested in is my business worth anything at all? Most people think, because it's an online business, especially if you've got friends who are not involved in the space, they're like, well, it's not a real thing, nothing really exists. Surely no one actually wants to buy that business. But in fact, there are lots of people out there who might have investing backgrounds. A lot of the people we deal with come from a real estate or property investing background. They might have large stock portfolios, be successful entrepreneurs. And the attractiveness of the online space is the returns you can make. So we sell a real range of businesses. We don't just do businesses in the e-commerce space, so we sell SaaS and software businesses, we sell e-commerce, FBA businesses, we sell content businesses, lead generation, you name it, as long as it's an online-based business, we'll do it. So just to give you all a rough idea of where e-commerce businesses fall on the spectrum of value versus demand, they're on the buyer demand scale, they're almost the most demanded type of businesses we have. To the average person coming into the industry, e-commerce businesses feel the most real because you have that physical product. With a software business, it's almost entirely virtual, so there's not really anything to see. So there are a lot of people who find the e-commerce space attractive. Whether that's e-commerce, FBA, wherever you're selling, there's people interested in that. E-commerce businesses are also some of the most valuable we sell in terms of a multiple of profit. That's mainly due to the fact that there's a lot of buyer demand, there's lots of people in the space, they're very attractive, and also the scalability options you get. For any of you who have started selling on Amazon, wherever you might be in the journey, hopefully you can see how quickly you can scale up those businesses, which is not necessarily something you see in other business models. So you might look at a SaaS business, for example, and see that it's very much in demand and the multiple of profit is slightly higher than e-commerce. But that can often take many years to get to that stage, which is why buyers pay a premium. Whereas e-commerce businesses and FBA businesses, it's not uncommon at all to see businesses that are 1-2 years old doing $1 million a year or more in revenue. Whereas in all my years of doing this, I don't think I've ever seen a SaaS business get to $1 million in a year. It's almost unheard of, but in e-commerce, very common. So for those of you who have not started making money yet, there are still reasons to start thinking about an exit and when you should be selling. So just going through, these are probably 4 of the most common ones that come up and see. So generally speaking, people we deal with aren't necessarily actively planning to sell. Sometimes something just comes along in life gets in the way, and they need to move on and sell their business. And they want to be in a position where they can cash out if they need to, and that's not going to be a major problem. So firstly, it's kind of like disaster planning. Just best practice exit planning. If you want to be in a position where you can eventually sell and have those options, it's good to think about these things right from the start. It's much, much easier to get things right from day one than do what most of us have done when building our businesses and kind of get 5 years in and realize we've been doing everything wrong and have to spend tens of thousands to fix things. So if you get them right from day one, it'll make your life a lot easier further down the line. Another thing is just not leaving potential value on the table. Part of exit planning in general is increasing the value of the business a more valuable business generally will make more money, it'll be easier to run, and it will generally be less stressful. So even if you're not thinking about selling, there are still a lot of best practices you can follow to make sure that even if you don't want to sell, your business is still in a better position than not. Another one that comes up, especially for a lot of you in the room, you're probably serial entrepreneurs. You've got lots of different product ideas. You might be looking at different categories and you think, well, there's not necessarily synergies between my gardening business and my dog food business. So launching another business might be an option. You might find you're more passionate about one than the other. You've done one, you don't really want to run it anymore. So another one is just giving yourself an option when you launch another business. A lot of the clients we deal with have quite large portfolios. They might be quite successful businesses in their own right, but being able to focus on just one or two businesses is extremely powerful. So this is just something just a general thing that I see. A lot of businesses look really great from the outside, but when you dig down below the surface, often you find businesses that are extremely complex with support. They're not particularly profitable. They have a lot of supply risk and a lot of owner reliance, which is one of the attractive things about Amazon businesses in general, that you very rarely have high support requirements. Often if you're shipping yourself, let's say you have your own warehouse and you're shipping products out yourself, you're going to have lots of issues with returns, all sorts of various stock problems. With FBA, that's almost entirely removed. They're often quite unprofitable. Most FBA businesses I see make a lot of money. Their margins are really solid. Some of the other e-commerce business models can be much slimmer margins. Supplier risk. This is something that when you're starting out, most people just start with one supplier, maybe two. As you expand your business, it's important to have multiple suppliers, so you reduce that risk. And also very owner reliant. One thing I noticed with FBA businesses particularly is it's quite rare to find an owner who's working 60 hours a week compared to a SaaS business or a regular content business where it's very much time intensive. So it is really great in the FBA model that you can remove that owner reliance. Amazon really does do a lot of the work for you, especially once you've got things off the ground. I'm going to go into a little story about a client we've just completed a deal for him. Just to give you a bit of background on the good businesses, while they might look great on the outside, they're not always that valuable. But that doesn't necessarily mean you can't get it into a position where it is. So I first met Vincent about a year ago now at a conference very similar to this. At the time, his business was about 3 years old. He was in the fashion and accessories industry. He was working full-time in the business. He also had an apprentice helping him out, like an intern. He was doing all the shipping himself. He didn't use a fulfillment center. He was getting everything shipped to his small apartment I think he was living in Thailand at the time. A small apartment, shipping it all out, working all hours of the day, just doing really basic stuff that can quite easily be done by a fulfillment center. He only had about 10 SKUs. His products were quite popular. He had done very well on Kickstarter when he first launched the business, got it off the ground, had a couple of products that were doing really well. Most of his sales were through his website, and about 25% were on Amazon. And he kind of hit a little bit of a plateau in the business where he'd struggled to scale it. He hadn't really focused on Amazon. He'd been quite focused on his own website, which had been doing well for years, but he really did struggle to kind of get it to that next level. At the time, the business was making about $50,000 net a year with a 20% net margin. So he was doing about $250,000 gross. So on the outside, that sounds like a great business. $50,000 a year, $250,000 turnover. That's great. Valuation-wise, when I first chatted to Vincent, a lot of the process of selling a business is quite a long journey. Most of the time, we actually spend far more time speaking with people well in advance of selling rather than the actual sales process itself, which a lot of people don't realize is actually usually the quickest part. Quite often it's a 1, 2, 3 year process even to get it to the stage where it can be sold. So when I first spoke to Vincent about a year ago now, his business was worth just under $100,000. So not an amount to be like sneered at, but not quite where he wanted to be. So does it pay to plan? You might be thinking, hey Thomas, this is great. I can do all this work. I can save a few dollars here and there. Is that really worth it? Does it really make any difference if my business is worth 100,000 or 110,000. So the first thing we worked on, or Vincent did, I would try and take the credit, but that would be slightly unfair. We cut down his working hours, and one of the main things or Vincent did in that case, was moving over to FBA. He no longer shipped products himself. Because he had put so much effort into the original sourcing of the products, he was like very concerned about quality and like any kind of problems on that front. But I mean, Amazon is a very reliable fulfillment infrastructure. So once he had moved over to that, he was happy. He managed to remove himself. The majority of his time previously had been spent packing, shipping, doing all the kind of boring stuff that you really don't need to be doing. We also added a few more SKUs. So we had various successful products. Like we said, he had about 10. And then we expanded that out. It was quite simple, more colors, slightly different products. They weren't a huge amount different. It wasn't revolutionizing the world, but he'd worked with his supplier to do that. We got the business to about $94,000 net, which is almost double where it was before, with about 35% net margin, which was an improvement, and that was mainly because he had scaled his Amazon sales, which was kind of a channel he hadn't really focused on before. The business sold for $235,000 plus $20,000 for the stock he had on hand. So effectively, the 12 months of work he put in made him an extra $229,000. And that's because obviously in that year, he made the 94,000 in net, plus the difference between the 100 and the 235 is 135,000. So 1 year of work, 229,000 upside from where he was before. And one of the key things about generally exit planning when you're thinking about your business value is that, as James mentioned a little bit early on, when you sell a business, you get a multiplier of profit. So for every dollar you save or every extra dollar you make, effectively you can multiply that when it comes to business value by approximately 30. So for every dollar you save in your business on a monthly basis, that could be worth $30 in value. So $1,000 in saving is $30,000 in value. So a lot of the small things that you might think are kind of not really worth doing, it doesn't make any difference, save $10 here, $50 there, making improvements, getting your hours down from say 40 down to 30. When it comes to value, that really does have a big effect. So it's definitely something to keep in mind. Even if you're not necessarily thinking about selling, just think about the value you might be leaving on the table by not saving, or just doing that little bit extra to make a little bit more. So that was a real life case study, but we look at a lot of businesses. We've sold about 400 now, many of which in the e-commerce space, and we put a lot of time and internal thought and resource into valuations. Ultimately, it's in our best interest for industry valuations and people to sell their business for as much as possible, because we take a percentage when the business sells. So you sell for more, we make more. It's kind of very much equally aligned interests in that respect. So some of the things that take into account, well, for simplicity's sake, I've used a higher end multiple of about 3 times net profit and a lower end of about 2. In reality, we sell businesses at all sort of ranges. Some might be 1.5, some are 5, but the vast majority are somewhere in that 2 to 3 times range. So if you think about it, that could be the difference between, say, a $200,000 business and a $100,000 business. So as you scale, the difference in multiple can make a real big difference. Whereas when you're relatively small, it might seem quite insignificant, but in fact, it can be quite a large difference when you go along. So one of the things that the buyers will look for in any business is how old is it? Seems quite obvious, but the older a business is, the less risky it is from a buyer perspective. It's been around for slightly longer. You can see that that's a sustainable business that's going to be consistently in demand. So that's one of those variables that I guess you can't really do anything clever to affect that. It's really just a case of staying in the game for a period of time. So businesses that sell for a premium are usually at least 2 years old. Anywhere under 18 months old, your multiple starts to go down quite quickly. The amount of time, so much like in Vincent's business, who's working full time, from a buyer perspective, there are a lot of buyers out there, much like a lot of you in the room who might come from an investment background. They don't have 40 hours a week to work on a business, and they don't want to spend 40 hours a week on a business. So if you can go from a business that might be 40 hours a week or even 30, 20 hours a week and get that down to less than 10, less than 10 tends to be the sweet spot where there's little sensitivity, and that's where you really do get the premiums. And with FBA businesses particularly, it really is quite achievable to do that. It's not like you're running a service business where you have to be doing all the work yourself. A lot of it's done for you. Once you've got it set up, you can get it in quite a lean operational way. That means that you really can get that time per week down. Unless, of course, you get to the size where your business starts to grow and you get to the stage where you're making hopefully 5 figures or more in profit a month. And that's the stage where just doing it yourself, it's going to be impossible to cut down the hours. But you can start to hire people to cut down your personal input. The general trend of the business is also quite important, and timing is very important when it comes to selling a business. People want to buy a business that's growing. They don't want to buy a business that's been abandoned and falling. They don't want to buy a business that's been completely maxed out and is now flat. So the premium multiples really do go for the businesses that are still growing. And while it might be tempting while your business is growing to not really think about selling, it can in fact be the best time to sell. So it's definitely one of those things to consider. The other thing is your reliance on particular sources or channels. If you have one product, one supplier, and you're just selling on Amazon, then that business is going to be worth less than the business that has 50 products from 2 suppliers all selling on Amazon. So the more suppliers you can have, there's no reason why you can't have one main supplier, but if you can diversify away from just that one, have more products, maybe multiple channels, you could just sell on Amazon. It's not a major problem, but there are other ways you can go build out your own website or whatever that might be. It's another good way to increase your value. So does the perfect acquisition exist? A lot of people we deal with are kind of quite surprised that anyone would want to buy their business. They'll say, oh, it's not very interesting, don't really like the niche. What I found over the years is that actually the most boring looking businesses, very innocuous looking businesses, are often the most valuable and most desirable. And one thing I've seen over the years, especially now we've got to the stage where we've got tens of thousands of buyers, there's always going to be someone who will love your business. So it doesn't matter what it is, just because you might think you're the only one in the world that likes it, I can assure you there's always someone else out there who would also be interested. So some of the areas of focus that we see, particularly with e-commerce buyers, and what makes the perfect acquisition for someone in that space, they'll generally look at 3 different areas, one being your supplier, one being product, and then there's a couple of need-to-haves. And these are very much things that, even if you're just starting, you should be thinking about these now. Relatively easy to get in place and much harder to get in place down the line. I think right from day one, you might spend a little bit of time cycling through suppliers, testing different suppliers, but once you find one who's reliable and consistent, that's very important. One thing that buyers really don't like, and one thing that investors really don't like, is uncertainty. So the more consistent your supplier can be, and the more you can show that, then the more it's going to be desirable from a buyer perspective. No one wants to buy a business where the business is consistently out of stock for 6 weeks or whatever, no matter how much that business is worth. So finding great partners like Steve, for example, and people who can supply you on a consistent basis, wherever they might be based, is very important. Transfer of terms is also important. Quite often, especially as you scale your business, and if you're a good entrepreneur, you should be negotiating better rates, better terms, better prices, whatever that might be. It's important to ensure that that's going to be transferable to someone who comes in to take over your business. Whether that means getting it in writing or whatever that might be, the more transferable it is, the better. We had a client a couple of years ago who had a very messy e-commerce business. He hadn't really thought about selling it at all. He'd kind of done the complete opposite of everything you should do. One of the main things that came up to make his business unsellable was that the fulfillment center he was using, which was not Amazon, was actually run by his brother. And he was getting like a 75% discount on the market rate. So his business actually was making basically nothing. But because of the fact he had his brother who was like very generously charging him basically nothing to fulfill the products, that was almost unsellable. So using a mainstream like Amazon FBA, very simple, it's all transferable, no major issues there. Another one is a straightforward setup, documented processes. So with your supplier, you want to make sure you've got one that has quite a simple order process. And if possible, I've seen some businesses in the past where their suppliers might still be somewhat stuck in the dark ages, which can be kind of an opportunity as an entrepreneur, because you can get to the stage where you can really improve their processes. You might just, even something as simple as just selling like an Excel sheet with your orders each week, if you know they're going to be each week or each month. If you know they can reliably do that and you're a very consistent process that doesn't take you that long, then that's a great thing. Compared to the business where every day you're on the phone trying to negotiate a spot rate for a different product. So something straightforward, well documented, is always desirable from a buyer perspective. The other thing, if possible, this is probably one of the more difficult ones, not quite as essential, but if you can get a sole or an exclusive sourcing arrangement, maybe with a very specific supplier or niche supplier, then that's going to be very valuable, especially on Amazon, where you really do have the potential to grow very quickly. But there's also the downside to that potential scale is the fact that it is very competitive. So the more of a moat you can build around your business and stop other competitors getting in, then that can be really quite helpful and valuable. So another thing is, much like we did with Vincent's business, one of the first things we did there was he had a very low product, well, he had a very high product concentration risk. So we only had 10 SKUs, which is not too bad. When you're starting out, and I should caveat this, when you're starting out, you really should start with a small number of SKUs. Don't launch 500 products on day one. It's definitely not the best way to go. But as you go, just consistently add more and more products. So around anything more than 20, 25 is a good number to get to. Any less than that, especially if you're reliant on one or two products, that can be slightly more risky. So don't necessarily do it all at once, but the less reliant you can be on one or two bestseller rockstar products, the better. Consistent margins are important. This is one of the reasons it's important with your suppliers. And one of the advantages of Amazon is that it has a very consistent and reliable pricing. They might make small tweaks every now and then, but generally speaking, what you see is what you get. You know what to expect. It's highly unlikely they're going to make huge changes to their terms. And if you've got decent deals with your suppliers and you continually are a good customer, you pay on time, you help with a consistent process, you continue to do more and more volume, even if you're negotiating yourself better and better prices, you can get better, consistent margins. Buyers always like to see that. No one wants to buy a business where a product one day costs $1, the next day costs $3, the next day costs $2.50. So working on consistency is important. If you've got an Amazon business, or almost any business, reviews in this day and age are absolutely essential. Almost anyone who's buying anything online, or anywhere in fact, will look at reviews. And one of the main benefits of having good Amazon reviews is you're also going to get some solid Amazon rankings. And that's definitely an important thing that buyers will look at. You don't necessarily need to be a bestseller in your category or anything like that. If you can be, it's great. But if you can consistently be at the top of your category or the top 10 of your category or subcategory or whatever that might be, then that's important. And that's where the age comes in. If you're there for 2 weeks, that's great. But if you can't sustain it, it's not so good. But if you build your business in a sustainable way, you should be able to continue to get those reviews coming in, keep customers happy. If you source great products, then hopefully the rankings will remain solid. Another thing is kind of having a clear product roadmap. So much like with Vincent's business, when I first approached him, it wasn't as if he had never thought about launching any new products. It wasn't like he had no other ideas. He just hadn't really got around to it yet. He was thinking, oh, I don't really want to do that. He'd kind of half checked out mentally with the business, thought he wanted to move on. So in that case, it was important. He said to me, hey, Thomas, I've got these ideas for these other products. I've spoken to the supplier, we've prototyped them, we just haven't got around to launching them. So it didn't take him a huge amount of time to get those out there. So when you are building a business, just think about what you could be doing in the future. It's always important to plan. Even if you think, hey, look, I'm going to sell this business in 12 months, there's no reason why you shouldn't have a 3-year plan. So in my company, for example, we have a 10-year plan, a 3-year plan, a 1-year plan, and then we also have quarterly targets that we work towards. It means that wherever we are, kind of whatever stage we are, whatever day it is of the week, we've always got that kind of like long-term goal in mind, whether that's product-based or business-based. And buyers always like to see that as well. No one wants to see a business that's been kind of manufactured for sale. So make it look like you want to run the business for a long time. And ultimately, even if you don't sell the business, that's going to put you in a very strong position. So one of the things well, 4 of the things that you need to have if you're going to sell a business, and these are definitely things that you can work on from day one, and they're much, much easier to do from the start rather than months down the line. So the first one, this is something that gave me headaches for many years after thinking I was very smart, got my business degree, set up a business, but didn't keep my accounts. Got to tax return day and it was a complete mess. So wherever you are in your business cycle, just keep clean books from day one. Whether you hire a bookkeeper, an accountant, whether you get friends or family to help you, just keep clean books. There's lots of cheap and affordable accounting software out there you can use. We actually use Excel for quite a lot of ours still. Keep clean books. When you come to sell, it's absolutely essential you can show how much money you've been making on a consistent basis. And if you want to plan, if you come to speak to me, even if you're not even thinking about selling, you might be a long way away, I'll be a lot more helpful for you if I can see your books, see where you're spending money and where you might be able to save. And that's one thing my friend Vincent had. He knew all of his numbers very well. His business might not have been particularly sellable at the time, but there were a lot of things in there that we could improve quite quickly, just from kind of the experience of looking over. So do that from day one. So much easier to do it rather than 12 or even 24 months down the line when you're kind of panicking last minute for like tax return day or like when it comes to ultimately selling the business. Another thing is, especially for those of you who might be running like paid advertising within Amazon or externally, having historic data and keeping track of your past data is important. And one thing that a lot of people do, I think, for entrepreneurs, especially when you're starting out, people feel like shameful if they fail. They might, I tested $1,000 in ads and I didn't make any money back, and then they kind of brush it under the carpet. But from a buyer perspective, it's really great if you can show what's worked really well and what's not worked well. One of the things we do when preparing a business for sale is we talk about the growth opportunities that business will have, things that could be done to improve it. And if we know what's worked really well in the past, then that can be a great opportunity. So we quite often deal with clients who have a background in running paid traffic. So if we know you've spent $100 in ads and maybe made $1,000 in revenue, that might not necessarily be something you're interested in or have the time to work on. But from a buyer perspective, that can be a great area of potential. And conversely, if there are things you've done and they've not worked, that's great. You can kind of tick it off the list. No business has kind of run out of growth opportunities. It's just if you can tick off the things that don't work and the things that do, then that's going to put you in good stead for future success. Another thing like you can do right at the start is just get a professional website. Even if you're not selling through your website, just have some sort of landing page. Doesn't have to be anything fancy, just a one-page thing. What you'll find as your business grows is always important, like for people to be able to get hold of you. So have an email address on there. I think for my first 2 years of running my business, I still used my Hotmail account, which I set up when I was like 14. It's really not difficult to just buy a domain. It doesn't have to be anything like extremely brandable or anything like that. Just something that represents what your business is, and then your name, just so customers can get hold of you. It looks professional, and then it's all just in one place. The quicker you get that, the better. We've dealt with businesses in the past where people have kind of been using a combination of like their personal Gmail account, and then they've used their work address when they've been running their business at lunchtime, and things like that. So if you can get it all in one place from day one, it's going to make your life and my life a lot easier when it comes to sell. Another thing is an evergreen niche. This is a difficult one, because when you're starting out, one of the most tempting things is to go after like the trending product. It's like, what's the most popular thing on Amazon at the moment? What's everyone buying? What I've found over the years as I've got older and slightly wiser is that, like I said a little bit earlier, like boring businesses, products that are going to be around in 10 years' time are the kind of businesses that people want to buy. So look for something that's evergreen. Has the industry been around 5 years? I think someone earlier was talking about like gardening products, great one, hair products, maybe not in my case, but in general. It's a good industry to be in. Try and avoid anything that's trending. So technology products tends to be an area I avoid. You see, if you're in the technology space, one of the problems with that is you have to be consistently launching new products, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it means that your previous products that have done quite well might start to tail off. So just when you go into it, just think about the niche or the industry you're getting into. Is that still going to be around in 5 years, 5 or 10 years time? Is there consistent demand? And also something that's not particularly seasonal is good. Like selling something like Christmas hats might be good for 3 weeks of the year, but for the other like 49 weeks, it's not going to be particularly good. So while that might be a great cash flow, from a buyer perspective, it just doesn't have that consistency that people look for. And one of the things that buyers really want as well is that consistent cash flow. Your business might make $100,000 a year in profit, but if it makes that all in November and December and then nothing for the rest of the year, that business is never going to be worth as much as the one that's quite consistently makes 8 to 12. So this is something that comes up all the time. People don't think about when they're going to have to sell their business. They think they don't need to. They get lazy, they get bored. They might move on to a new business. Something might come up in their life. All sorts of different things can come along. And then they sell too late. So this is an example of a business we looked at a while ago now, but it's certainly not uncommon. Could have picked this from hundreds of different businesses I looked at over the years. They have a very nice trend. So this is gross income. Could be net income. Doesn't make a huge amount of difference here. Over the years. So you can see like kind of consistently grew month on month. And then the guy we were dealing with got a new job and said, hey, I don't really want to run this business anymore, but it's got great potential. It's still a really great business. Let's sell it. Oh, by the way, it made like $8,000 last month. And then you look at it, it's actually dropped down to 3.5. So from a buyer perspective, they're not going to look at the average really in this case. The business has dropped, you stop working on it. They're going to look at not quite the last month, but the month you've just had. So that's quite an extreme example, and most businesses won't quite drop off that quickly, but I selected a particularly drastic graph from the archives. So just think about timing. Obviously, you can never know exactly when a business might start to slow down, and hopefully a business never will. If you're consistently doing the right things, you should continue to grow. But if you know there's something coming up that will affect the business, so you're on your job, moving away, started a new business, started paying less attention, something coming up, then think about selling at kind of the 3 months before you quit stage, rather than when you've kind of completely given up on it, you've stopped ordering products or whatever that might be. Because buyers, contrary to many potential sellers' beliefs, will not pay you for that like previous performance. They're going to be very fixated on the last month you had. So how do you plan an exit? I mean, regardless of where you are in the process, it's not too early to start thinking about these things. A lot of them are like fundamentals that are going to set you up for a kind of a successful business in general. So a lot of you will probably be a little bit too early for this, but it's never too early. Well, could be too early. Once you start making money, get a valuation, so speak to a broker or do some independent research, figure out what your business might be worth. If you're proactively looking to sell, work on a goal-based exit plan. The things you might work on if you're thinking of selling in 3 months is quite a lot different than, say, 12 months. So in the example I used earlier with Vincent, he had about 12 months to work on his business, so there were some things in there, like launching new products that were quite viable. Whereas if he was working on a 3-month plan, we probably could have moved everything over to Amazon and cut his hours down, but there was no way we're going to be able to do all of those things. So knowing how long it is until you want to sell is also very important. And then some just like really simple fundamentals. Have a strategy in place, whether that's a plan or whatever it might need to be. Doesn't necessarily need to be extremely complicated. Have systems in place, document everything you do. Again, doesn't need to be overly complicated. You ideally want the documentation to be at the level where if you can't work that day and you want to hand over to a friend or like competent family member, you can just give them some basic documentation. They still know what to do. They know who to contact. They know when they should be ordering stock. Just all the simple things like that. Doesn't mean you need to produce a 1,000-page encyclopedia with like details on absolutely everything, but the more you can write down, the better. Have a process. One of the great things about FBA businesses in general is a lot of the process is kind of built in just by the fact you're selling on the Amazon platform, and a lot of it is done for you. But just have a process, whether that's dealing with your suppliers, dealing with customer support, dealing with negative reviews, dealing with running paid advertising campaigns, new product sourcing, whatever that might be. Have a process. Even if you don't think you've got a process, most people do. So just write things down, the kind of things you look for. Another thing that's very important is stick to the plan. If you are actually serious about selling and you've gone through the hassle of setting up a successful business, then make sure you stick to whatever you've planned to do. That's going to put you in a much better position than if you kind of veer off the path and you might get distracted. As an entrepreneur, it's like very tempting, like lots of new ideas, 10 new ideas a week or a day or whatever that might be. It's very tempting to go try something different. But if you are thinking about selling, it's very important to be disciplined, however difficult that might be, and stick to the plan you have in mind. So just like very quickly, what does a usual sales process look like? What I've, I guess, neglected to include in here is all of the hard work that often goes in much before you even get to the stage of selling. So whether you've got a 12-month exit plan, you might not even have an exit plan at all, and you say, hey, Thomas, look, I'm just getting started, I don't want to sell at all. But hopefully you can take a few things away and start implementing them in your business. So many months away, or many even years away, you can be working on planning. When we do get to a sale, the process itself usually only takes 2 to 3 months to get a business sold. We sell anything in the $50,000 range up to, our largest deal at the moment is $5 million, which is going to take about 6 months. Start to finish, smaller deals might take a month. So we go through a 6-step process. We'll assess the business, which is effectively what we're doing like through the exit planning stage. With Vincent, we had like an assessment very early on. I said, hey, Vincent, look, the business is not worth the $200,000 you want for it. Let's work for the next 12 months to get it to that level. So assessment, valuation. We'll then prepare for the sale. So we prepare a nice prospectus about the business. And this where it's important to have everything documented, much like buyers want to have clean books, like a nice email account and things like that. The more data we can access and the more you know about your business, the easier it is to prepare. We then go through a kind of a marketing and negotiation stage with buyers, and we're fortunate enough we've got to the stage now where we've got tens of thousands of active buyers. So luckily this stage is consistently coming down and getting faster and faster. And then we go through a negotiation stage and then finally into closing. So that whole process, 2 to 3 months, whereas the exit planning can take many, many months, or even years in some cases. We've had clients who first spoke to you back in, the business we're selling at the moment, just to put it in perspective, it's a $5 million business. I first met him in 2012, and we started talking about the fundamentals of selling and things he should have in place. And just from some of the like really minor things he's taken away, nothing we're talking about here is revolutionising the world. No one's gone, wow, this guy is a genius. This stuff is all quite simple. Anyone can do it in their business. The sustainable things are very simple, can be done, and you can build your business to the stage where someone will want to buy it. Doesn't necessarily mean you really don't have to be actively thinking about selling, but there will be someone out there who wants to buy your business when the time comes, especially if you followed everything we've spoken about. So if you want to get in touch with me, always always on my email. So Thomas at FE International is my email account. Website's feinternational.com, or you can follow us on Twitter if you're into that. I'm sure my social media team will love to hear from you all. So yeah, thank you. I don't know how much time I've got left, but I thought I'd do some Q&A. 8 minutes. Good timing. So has anyone got any questions? Hello?
Are you primarily looking for buyers in the States?
Yeah, so the question was, are we primarily looking for buyers in the States? Yeah, so going back a little bit in time without boring you with too much of the details, part of the reason we're now in Boston, and that's our head office there, we've got nearly 20 employees, is that the majority of business buyers are in the States. Around 80% of our sales go to buyers in the States. We deal with sellers, conversely, all over the world, about 50% US, 50% rest of the world, including the UK. But yeah, the vast majority of buyers are in States, which is why, despite being English, I'm talking in US dollars most of the time. Yes, sir.
How much does it cost to sell?
That's a good question. How much does it cost to sell? So depending on the size of the business, we charge anywhere from 10 to 15% on completion. We don't have any upfront fees.
10 to 15% of the sales price?
Yeah, that's correct.
Is there a sweet spot of value that people are looking to pay where there's more buyers, like maybe 200 to 300 mark, or more people at £1 million mark?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Where should you be looking to build it up to?
Yes, is there a sweet spot for buyers? Yes and no. So we have buyer demand at all different levels. Internally, we have divided the company effectively into 3 different teams who deal at the different levels, because at each level you get different types of buyers. So below 100,000 we have one team, 100 to 500,000, and then 500,000 above. What we found since we segmented the team is actually we have quite consistent demand at any level. We're currently selling a $1.2 million business that was on the market for about 15 days before getting an all-cash offer. And then we also have $50,000 businesses that will sell extremely quickly. Generally, if it's under 100,000, we have, I wouldn't say unlimited amount of demand, but there's a lot of buyers. But there's definitely no like limit on where you can get to. Once you get above $1 million, you start dealing with a slightly different level of sophistication of buyer. So some of the things we spoke about really are quite essential. At the lower end, for like a $50,000 or $100,000 business, you can get away with maybe not quite having all your ducks in a row. But someone investing $1 million, $2 million, or even $5 million in a business definitely expects a higher level of sophistication and planning.
When you're looking to sell a business, are you looking to sell, we've all got limited companies, or are you looking to sell a brand with the products in that brand?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the question was, are we looking to sell the brand or the limited company? So 99% of our sales are what's called asset sales. So we're not selling the underlying limited company. There are various reasons for that. I guess one of the main ones, particularly with online businesses, while they might be like very scalable and they're great, generally going to be dealing with a buyer in the US. A buyer in the US doesn't usually want to buy a UK company. So yeah, we just sell the assets. It's a lot quicker and simpler for all parties. As deals get bigger, occasionally you see stock sales. So our $5 million deal at the moment, that does involve stock. That's a lot more complex, but that's like a 3-month contract and due diligence process, whereas lower end, an asset sale is a matter of days.